Hey there, unfiltered friends. This is Amanda.
Hello, and Megan.
So today we'll be sharing a throwback episode from season 1 where we discussed Jonathan Mooney's book, Normal Sucks. I know it sounds cliche, but this is one of those you'll laugh, you'll cry, and you'll do everything in between kind of books.
That is 100% true. I did both when we read it for the podcast, and it was a reread for me, so I knew what to expect. So we'll be sharing this series of episodes over the coming weeks, and then share our discussion with Jonathan Mooney himself as well.
Yeah, so you're likely going to notice a slightly different style compared to our current vibe. We were brand spanking new, and honestly, we're still not entirely sure how we got Jonathan to come on and chat with us about neurodivergent-affirming life and learning, but we did, and we're super excited about that still, and we're resharing all of it, the book club and the chat with the author over the next month.
Yeah, I'm still riding that high, and it's been about a year. So, but look how far we've come. So, would have guessed, right? It's like, let's start a podcast.
I definitely didn't guess. When I set this up in my bathroom and was like, we'll do this for a few months and it won't go anywhere. And then I'll be able to say that I tried podcasting once. I never thought we would be at this point.
Look at us now, right?
So, tens of thousands of listens later, like, okay, we did this. We're totally doing this. All right.
I know, it's bananas. I don't look at the stats that often, but I looked the other day and I was like, whoa. And then I sent them to my mom and my husband. I was like, so yeah, it's a shock to us all. But we want to remind you that our book club will be transitioning over to our Patreon community come September of 2025. We will meet 2 times per month, and we would love to welcome you to come and join the discussion.
Yes, absolutely. We totally would. Read the book, don't read the book, engage, be a fly on the wall. Whatever works for you works for us. But we are pretty excited about this kind of like change up to the book club. It can be so challenging as a secular progressive homeschooler to find your people. And this is just going to be one more way to make connections.
Yeah, I mean, if you've never heard the story, Amanda and I met in an online homeschool parent book club. We were co-hosts and business partners before we ever met one another in person, ever. So please don't underestimate the power of virtual friendships and connections. They are very real.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we're going to link the information in the show notes about how to join the new virtual book club. You can join as an all-access member, which gives you a monthly unit study, other live support meetings, multiple times a month, group chats, and like loads more. Or if you want, you can just join book club and come listen to those 2 meetings each month. You can, like I said, just listen. You can join in the conversation, whatever works for you.
Yeah. And if neither of those are options for you right now, you're like, it's summer, my brain is swimming, I can't. Just like, stop giving me things to do. Right. Yeah. You're looking for more points of connection, come join our Patreon as a free follower. You don't have to pay anything. You don't need an account, nothing. We share free content. Amanda puts out a really awesome newsletter over there every single month with what we're up to and behind the scenes stuff and more. So yeah, come hang out with us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we're going to pop a coupon code for 90% off your first month in the show notes. You can use the code BOOKWORM, all one word, capital, BOOKWORM, when joining our Patreon for that first month discount. But now, without further ado, we hope you enjoy Normal Sucks.
Welcome. It is book club episode of Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. My name is Megan, and my fabulous co-host is...
Hi, this is Amanda.
Welcome. We are still reading Normal Sucks by Jonathan Mooney. We are on sections 5 and 6. If this is the first episode that you've come across on Spotify or YouTube or whatever, and you're like, wow, that's random, I'm in the middle of a book, don't stress. You can hop in anywhere you want to. You can certainly go back and listen to the original episodes. You don't need to read the book to be part of our virtual book club. But yeah, we pick awesome books I shouldn't even say awesome books. A bunch of the ones that are on our to be read list, we haven't read. And so we cannot guarantee they're going to be awesome. The last one sucked. So this one's good. The last one, I did have some solid takeaways from the last book. But overall, it wouldn't be a book that I was like, you must run out and read this book.
You should read this. I actually was just talking with someone recently and I was like, you should actually probably read this book, but definitely buy a used copy from somewhere or see if you can get it from the library so they don't get any money for it.
Yeah.
Please don't give them money for this book, but read it.
I know. So our premier sponsor is Hub of Curiosity that runs these amazing classes on OutSchool. And they're doing a class this fall that involves The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, which is kind of this like staple Holocaust education book, but it's horrendous. And it's been denounced by like every Holocaust organization. And I looked at the class description and it literally says, please do not buy the book new. Get it from the library or buy it used. Do not support this. But their main goal in reading it is to point out the historical inaccuracies. So it's going to be a lesson in kind of like taking something at face value, but then researching it and finding the myths or the fallacies or the historical inaccuracies and what danger is represented in that, right? I think sometimes there's this thing like, well, it's historical fiction. Authors have liberty. And it's like, liberty is one thing. Rewriting history is another thing. And I think when you border on something like, Holocaust denial or, saying that slavery was a good thing for the people involved, like all of that. It's exactly.
Can we just look at my cup for today? This is like the perfect segue into Amanda's teacup today. It's made in the USA and it has a picture of Barack Obama. And then on the back, it actually has a picture of his birth certificate, his US birth certificate.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
Yeah, rewriting history, denying obvious things because it fits your narrative. Not ideal. We do not support here.
Exactly. Yeah. Actual facts are good things, especially when there's a paper trail associated with it. It's unbelievable, right? So yeah, I wouldn't necessarily buy the previous book. We read John Holt's Teach Your Own, and there was some valid, I did just quote it in our last episode, like something that was in there, but yeah, it was not our favorite book. So I can't promise you that some of the ones on our to be read list aren't going to be really awful either, but this one's good. So that's been positive. That's been a nice change after the last book. If you'd like to read Normal Sucks, we are giving away a copy. So you can, there's a link in our podcast description. So if you're on Spotify, iTunes, whatever, it should be there for you in the description. You can go and enter. You have until July 20th. It might be the 21st, but I forget. So let's just go with the 20th to be on the safe side. Thank you. And so go ahead and enter. It's an amazing book. We think you'll like it. And yeah, we would love to give you a copy. So go ahead and enter. That would be awesome. But today we're going to be talking about chapters 5 and 6. Chapter 5 is titled Act Normal, which is pretty awesome. There's a quote on the chapter header for chapter 5 here that says, it's a Van Gogh quote, and it says, normality is a paved road. It's comfortable to walk, but no flowers grow on it. And I love that, which is pretty awesome.
So you actually have it. I thought that this section was interesting, right? So we've talked about this before. Megan and I share a Google Doc where we put our notes and we kind of keep we share things back and forth on the Google Doc. And so in typing up my notes, it was pretty clear we have a few things in common, but we took really different things out of these two sections today. So I'm interested to hear what we have to say. You actually have some things kind of in the beginning, and my notes didn't start until page 113. So what do you have early in section 5?
I did. I mean, I loved the quote. I mean, it wasn't a super deep thought, but I just wanted to share this quote on page 107 that says, normal must be resisted if you are ever going to live your life as who you are fully in all your complexity. And we had played a video when we did an episode a while back called Why Are Homeschoolers Called Weird? And we played a short video by J.P. Sears. We are not, speaking of taking facts and presenting them as your own narrative, right? Okay. We are not saying we love everything J.P. Sears has ever said, but he did have this one thing where he talks about normality being kind of the death of originality, and the fact that in order to kind of fit in society, you have to rub away your raw edges and the things that make you awesome and the things that make you unique. And so I just liked that quote there because it was kind of like an exclamation point on that thought that we had in that previous video. And then on page 108, I had made a note that talked about, there's a line here that there's a bit of a story here about having people act normal, right? Don't stand out, don't draw attention to yourself, act normal, do what's expected in this particular situation, etc. And I highlighted the section that said, and I wonder if we truly understand what it does to a human being to tell them to pretend to be someone or something they are not, and how this demand requires people to repress, efface, and cover up who they really are. And so I was at a homeschool conference over the weekend and I talked about why we should all better understand neurodivergence. It was a whole topic. And so this to me kind of leads into like masking in the neurodivergence world, right? Like, so I gave the example of like, I was saying like, I have a mouth of a truck driver, right? And so if you're in a situation where you can't do that, it's extra work for me. And I'm not asking anybody to like break out their small violin, right? But I have to like pre-screen my thoughts inside my head through like an extra filter that I don't normally have to pre-screen my thoughts through, right? Like I went out to dinner after the conference with friends and who I knew, and I knew I could just be, and and it was just, full me. It was who I
Mhm.
am. But then when I'm having a conversation at the conference and I don't know this person from a hole in the wall, and it's like I have to like pre-filter my thoughts and make sure I don't be like, that's fucked up. I can't do that with people that I don't know. And then somebody else that was in the seminar said like, oh, it's like when I deal with my mother-in-law and I have to like pre-screen everything and like mind my P's and Q's and this and that. And then when I get done with interacting with my mother-in-law, I'm like, oh, right. Like you can breathe and you can finally be yourself. And
Mhm.
so I feel like, this book talks a lot about neurodivergence because our author is dyslexic and ADHD. And it's like the people that are in environments where we're constantly asking them to do that and to act normal and hide their authentic selves or squash their authentic selves, that level of exhaustion of having to pre-screen everything through like, is this okay? Do other people do this? Should I be doing that? Right. And to do that all the time, like how damaging and how exhausting that would be for a human being. So, which I thought was an important note there. And then the last note that I had before your notes kick in the document was we talked about deschooling in our very first episode that we ever recorded. And there was a note here. So our author has this incredibly toxic school experience in special education as a dyslexic learner before. I was going to say before people really understood dyslexia, but I don't know that most of the school system truly understands dyslexia now either. So, I mean, we've made strides, but are we there? No. If I had a dyslexic child, would I be like, they'd be better served by the public school system than with me? No, I would not think that. So, especially not in the state of South Carolina, where they're not even guaranteed support and services. So, he's got a thing here. His mom pulls him out of school after this horrendous experience, and he's unschooled. There is no formal education happening. And he talks about the fact, he quotes John Holt, who was the
Mhm.
author of our last shit show book. And he says, my mom knew intuitively what John Holt, a former professor of education at Harvard, knew intellectually. For every day that school is toxic, it takes a day to heal. My mom knew something about healing because she was wounded too. And the two of them just took this big chunk of time to recover from that experience. And I think we cannot stress that enough. I mean, we say deschooling how often in groups, in Facebook groups, when people are coming in saying, and people are like, deschool. And that, especially I think as kids are in middle school and high school, there's this public school mindset that's really hard to shake that like, if you miss a day, I mean, think about it, right? You are not allowed to miss a day of school. And if you do, you will have work sent home. You will have to make stuff up. So there's this mindset that like every single day is crucial and that if you miss a day, you will be behind. And now here we are, veteran homeschoolers saying take off 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, and
A
just
year, and
exactly.
people, I can't. I absolutely cannot. And like, well, the amount of stuff that you'll learn in the second year will be 3 times what you would have learned in that first year if you don't take that first time off. But to that end, I have actually found that in a lot of cases, I've stopped even using the word deschooling because I feel like so many people are resistant. Deschooling gets thrown around so often, and it's like, well, I can't deschool. But, if you take the time to try to explain, like, this is what you're doing. You're not deschooling. You're finding a way to bring back the curiosity and reignite a love of learning.
Mhm.
Now you're doing that by not teaching anything actively. You're not top down instructing anything at that time. But the important thing is you're finding a way to bring back the curiosity and reignite the love of learning. And if you just spend as much time as you need getting back to that point, then when you do actually dive back in, they're going to learn so much more. They're going to retain so much more, right? We like this is another one of those things. We can point to the research, but it's also common sense.
Yeah. And if you give them time to heal and they're open to learning and receptive, otherwise you're just going to bang your head against the wall and you're going to be doing the thing. You're going to be instructing and schooling and all that, but it's going to be the most futile effort ever.
Mhm.
And so I think it's interesting. Like, we both come to homeschooling from a different place. Like, you didn't have a trauma school kid, right? You had a happy learner. I have 3 kids. My oldest was severely wounded by public school. Despite, I will always add the disclaimer, despite having amazing teachers, his first grade year and second grade year, and he's 16 now, so it's going back sometime. But my second kiddo was happy in school. She was as happy as a little clam for the most part. It's still the greatest thing I ever did was taking her out, because what she has blossomed into would never have been an option if she was in school. And my third kiddo never made it to school. So I have 3 very different case studies. You've got your own different case study, right? But especially for those kids, if you are pulling out a kid who's been bullied, who was quote unquote failing, right? We talked about it was it this book, Amanda, where it was like, no, it was in the John Holt book. There I go again, quoting John Holt, right? Like, how did it go? It was like, if the school succeeds, then the school gets the credit. If the student fails, then it's the student's fault, right?
Mhm.
So your student has been blamed for failing in an environment that was supposed to be able to know how to support them in achieving their goals. They need time to heal from that. And then I love that Jonathan Mooney references his mom here too. My mom knew something about healing because she was wounded too. If you have been through the ringer with the IEP process and all that kind of stuff, you need time to heal as well. And part of deschooling isn't just traumatic situation based or really rocky experience. Part of it is deprogramming our thoughts, right? We have more of that than our kids do because we've been around longer, of what education is, what school's supposed to look like, what the path to success looks like, all of that. And to really take that time off to listen to amazing podcasts like ours and read books and find other homeschool parents and go to mom's night out and do all these things and immerse yourself in that world, to start dismantling that really systematically programmed thought process about what school is.
Yeah. Because that's the problem, right? What we have been taught that what learning is equals school and public school instruction. And that's what we're trying to break free of. Learning does not equal public school instruction. It can, if that's where you are and you're happy to stay there. I'm not entirely sure why you're listening to our podcast, but by all means, stay there. But if you're not,
Public school system very often here.
I'm like, we're kind of called homeschool moms unfiltered. So I'm not 100% sure why you're chilling with us every week, but you're welcome. You're welcome. We're happy to have you here. Yeah. But that thing, it is not a one-to-one equation, and breaking free from that mentality and finding what works is, it's gold, right? And if we could bottle it and sell it, we'd be millionaires. We wouldn't be making a podcast and hoping that someday it brings in some money, but
Exactly. I wouldn't complain. That would be pretty awesome. And how much easier would it make people's lives, right? Kids and parents and all. Oh my gosh, wouldn't that be amazing? That would be pretty awesome. Yeah. So those were kind of my early thoughts in the early part of the chapter, just some of the things that jumped out at me. And then some of the stuff you jotted down did not jump out for me. So what were your thoughts?
Yeah. So after that, he moves into a story. He's talking about how he plays soccer. And starting in middle school, he's playing soccer for the school team. It might have been club soccer. I know there's a big difference, but I don't fully understand the big difference between club soccer and school soccer and all of that. But he's good, right? He's good at soccer.
I
And
was
he's
like,
telling
I have
him,
a kid who plays golf, and I have kids who play Pokemon. So like, this is not our world.
yeah, right. Not, I don't fully understand it, but there's a quote. He says, "The feeling of recognition, of being seen, of success was a drug for me. My mom felt this high too and sought out hit after hit. I don't judge her. Soccer was the way for her to show them all what she knew and they didn't, that I was good and valuable, that we were not just poor white trash." And it's that the comment and following the story, for me, it was one of those examples of like a parent trying to do their best and, maybe fucking up a little along the way, because that's what we do as parents. And the quote itself showed a level of maturity that I think most adults can only dream of reaching. And so it just really hit home for me that acknowledging and accepting and seeing that essence of, where the person was coming from, and appreciating that, even if they, like I said, kind of messed it up along the way. So yeah, that just really struck me from that whole kind of story.
All right, heads up, we might have a little choppy editing here. DHL dared to deliver a package and his service dog lost her ever-loving shit. So I'm going to do my best to piece Amanda's two thoughts together during editing, but if there's a wacky hole, it's because Waffles doesn't like people delivering packages. Take it away, Amanda.
And there, how dare they?
My house, they delivered a box to my...
Trespassing fools. So I was just saying on page 116, again, another great story. These two sections have a ton of stories, right, that are very relatable. And so in this one, he's telling a story about high school and how there was a husband and wife teacher team, and he had the wife one year, and she absolutely did not understand him, and he had a horrible time in her class. And then her husband approaches him and is like, "Hey, you should take AP English." And he was like, "Have you talked to your wife? Like, I have no business being in your AP English class." But he takes it. It ends up being a really good thing. He takes it his senior year. The teacher didn't care that he couldn't spell, and he was actually encouraged to write via dictation for this AP English class. And I thought that was an interesting point, because that was, for me in our home, that was one of the first kind of things that I noticed, that if my kid was dictating to me and I was doing the typing for them, what he was able to produce was amazing versus what he was able to produce on his own. And there's so much focus now on using voice to text software, and it's just not the same. And dictation, it's harder, it's more work, it requires the parent, or, if you got the money, you're paying a service or something to do it for you, but it requires your input instead of just, here. But voice to text software, it's hard. And I will never understand why voice to text software on my phone can do so much better than any voice to text software we've tried in a Word writing document. They're rough, right? They're rough. They're really hard to deal with. And there's just something, I was talking with my kid about it. There's something about like sitting down in front of a computer to work on it that kind of jumbles your thoughts a lot of times and makes it harder to get it out versus, just sitting back, relaxing on the couch, and you're telling a story and someone else is actually worrying about typing, and you're not getting distracted by the fact that it didn't make a new paragraph or it didn't include any punctuation or this or that. And so just think it's important to remember that there are different ways of getting to the end product, and embrace those, and I appreciated the fact that he specifically mentioned dictation, because I feel as a society, we've gotten really far away from it. If you have a kid who has any kind of services, even as a homeschooler, a lot of times they say speech to text software, but it's a lot harder to get them to put dictation in there and to actually get dictation approved for your kid. And it makes a difference.
Yeah. Alternatives to writing have been huge for us. My kiddo took a class, like you said, sitting down at the computer can kind of jumble your thoughts. And so I have a kid who paralyzes and spirals very quickly when it comes to being confronted with a white screen or like a worksheet or we don't do worksheets, but like way back in the day, that would have been something that would have been like the death of her. Even like studying for the permit test for driving, it's like just that there's just a thought of like, she's a super smart kid. That thought of taking that test is really overwhelming. And so, we've kind of looked at some alternatives and things like that there. But I had signed her up for a class on Outschool with Jackson Pierce, who's a published author. She's amazing. And she does this 3-minute creative writing challenge where she gives the kids 2 wacky words that have like nothing to do with one another. It'll be like, a fainting goat and bubble gum, and they have 3 minutes to write a story. And because the words are so nonsensical and don't pair together, there's almost no way that you could write a serious story about those things. And so it takes all the pressure off, because it's just like, And then on top of it, it's a 3-minute challenge. And so it's like everybody's is going to be rushed. Everybody's is going to be silly. So you're not feeling like somebody else is going to turn in like, Tolstoy quality work and you're going to turn in something, right? And everybody just kind of shares their thing and they laugh. And it's like, but it breaks down that thing because as soon as she says go, they go. And it's just light and fun. And so it kind of removed some of that because otherwise the white screen was just paralyzing for her, and it did. It helped. I mean, she was in that class for like 2 years. And she got so much better at not sitting there. She'd sit there for, 2 hours and stare at a blank screen and just get no. And the whole time the stress and anxiety are building and building and building. So yeah, there's no reason to ever be in that situation. That was kind of a her thing where she was like, I've got this. I don't want help. And I'm like, you sure? Because there's like a million other ways that we could accomplish this, But yeah, there's no reason for somebody to be sitting there staring at a screen for that period of time. There's dictation. There's all kinds of options, which are great.
There are. And that story, even in itself, is an excellent example of how some things work for some kids and some things don't for others. I don't think that would work for my learner at all because due to a slow processing speed issue, that 3-minute timeline, that would make his brain go blank. He would be like, I can't think of any words to put between those two phrases. Like there's
like you had gum. Yes,
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so we have done funny writing classes that are along those same lines, but I have to be really careful to keep in mind the limitations in our own home and find things that don't include such a quick or really any indication of there being a time limit, because for him, it's not the white screen so much in that kind of a case as just a time limit. There's a time limit. Oh my God, there's a time limit. And and that's on repeat, and it's not helpful in any way, shape, or form. But we get to pick those things, right? We get to customize that. That's
exactly
the biggest advantage of homeschooling and different kids need different things and we do that.
Yeah.
But that actually kind of rolls perfectly into the next thing from the book, right? Because so again, we're going through different stories. He's sharing different things on page 125 and 126. He's talking about when he went to university. He starts out at a state school. He goes to the person who's responsible for his accommodations. And they say to him, you can't read, you can't write, you can't spell. You should consider something less intellectual. People like you shouldn't even be in college. And
I literally made this stuff.
WTF.
Like, I was like, what in the actual fuck? Like, what?
The person the school, the university has hired to help kids with accommodations tells them, like, you're useless and you shouldn't even be here. I don't even know why they let you come to college, essentially. And like, there are so many, there are so many things wrong with that on so many levels. But your point, you wrote, like, we have to be cautious with who's talking to our kids, the messaging that's being shared with our kids, because there are still people out there like that are going to pick at it or find the little things, criticize and critique over things that are outside of our control instead of focusing on, hey, there's a way around it. You can work within this, there's this limitation in this specific way, but that doesn't mean that it limits you. It limits this thing, this little piece. And there are so many other ways that we can get there.
Yeah. I mean, and I think for a while, the concept of homeschooling was that we wanted to bubble our kids from the real world. And there definitely has been historically and still is that segment of homeschoolers. I mean, if you've watched Shiny Happy People on Amazon, holy shit, right? I mean, it was just astronomical. So they still exist, right? My kids are in the world. They're out in the world. All 3 of my kids vend at farmers markets and they're in different groups, and 2 of them go to college and as teenagers, like as high schoolers, and, they're in the world. They're not bubbles. They're not sheltered. But in the formative years, especially when they are, I mean, we've read so many books in our other homeschool group that Amanda and I are in about, frontal lobe development and all this stuff, right? Like, they're not fully formed humans. They're just not. And you can call me a snowflake all day long, but I do not want somebody communicating with my kids who's going to tell them that they're a worthless piece of crap. Like, and I get it. Like, I mean, I live in the South, and so we see a lot, right? As far as just different ideologies mixing. And one of the things I've seen a number of times since we've lived in South Carolina is that t-shirt where it says like your feelings. And then there's a stick figure next to it that looks like it's screwing the words your feelings. And so it's basically like a fuck your feelings message. And I'm like, where is a society to be so broken that we don't care about what other human beings feel anymore? And so I'm like, if you want to throw things at me and call me a snowflake and whatever else, yeah, I do actually care about the things that are said to my kids, the way they feel about themselves. I care about the way we speak to other people and how that makes them feel about themselves. And I actually don't really see that as a weakness, right? Like, I think that's
Oh, yeah.
what humanity needs.
Mhm.
And so I like the fact I'm not trying to bubble my kids from the world, but while my kids are figuring out who they are and developing their strong sense of self, I don't want them coming into people who are going to tell them that they're worthless pieces of crap because of a
Mhm.
diagnosis or a shortcoming or a challenge or a bad day or whatever
Mhm.
it might be. Right. And so this story to me was just, and I get it. He was in college. By that point, I have no choice about who is interacting with
Yeah.
my kids. And,
Mhm.
at that point, even in high school, you're still kind of like, stepping down and outside influences are stepping up and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
But I mean, middle schoolers and teens especially have like so many self-confidence issues and things like that. And they have more and more mental health issues as we go on because of the society that we're living in and this and that. Why would you want to expose your kids to people like this? And if you're interacting with children and speaking to them this way, find yourself a new freaking job, right? Just far away from
Mhm.
children and humans in
Yeah.
general.
No, middle school is so hard, right? When we were in middle school, there was so much bullying. There's still so much bullying with social media. It's even worse nowadays. And it's not just middle school, right? It's not confined to middle school. It's happening in fourth and fifth grade and third grade. You hear these stories and I'm with you, we're not trying to bubble from the real world. We're not trying to hide science and we're not trying to those sorts of things, but I'm all about avoiding the bullying. Like we there's no need for that level of attack on your mental health and we find that the groups, the homeschool groups and that kind of stuff, there's just not as much. I mean, of
Mm-mm.
course, kids are going to be kids. There'll be things, or there'll be little issues here or there. We had we got together at the park with a friend just the other day. And afterwards, the mom said, my kiddo was saying, I really hope that I'm a good friend to my son because I see at school, they're in a regular brick and mortar school, so many kids who say they're friends and then they treat them really badly, or they
Uh,
say things behind their back that are really hurtful. And I just think, that's not a real friend. That's not a good friend. And I hope I'm not like that. I hope he never feels like I'm being that way to him. And I mean, first off, holy insightful Batman from an
yeah, I
11
love
year
it.
old, to be like, I really hope I'm a better friend than the jerks at school. But it's true. There's so much of that going on, and we don't see that. We're not experiencing that any level to anywhere close to that level in the groups that we're self-selecting to participate in. And I feel like a lot of that does come down to that, like, well, as a group, homeschoolers tend to be weird and not normal for all of the reasons that we've talked about in all of our podcasts leading up to now. But it's in a good way.
Yeah, exactly. I know, like my daughter has a best friend. They've been best friends for 4 years. They've never had a falling out. They've never had stress. They've never had tension. They just get along. They're kind to each other. They're very different I mean, they have very similar interests, which is why they're a great friendship, right? But, you know, they're 15 and 14 now. So they were, friends starting at 11 and 10. And so at that age, gender might play a role in a friendship a little bit more because you have, I think, a bigger disparity sometimes in certain things. So you had a boy and a girl. They were different, slightly different ages. They lived in different countries. He goes to school. She doesn't. We have a super loosey-goosey hippie family. He has more of a traditional family structure, right? Like there's so many differences about them, but they have core interests that are the same, which is why they're such good friends. and they just acknowledge one another's differences, respect one another's differences. And it's just a solid friendship, right? Like I've, knock on wood, like never had to deal with friend drama with any of my
Mm.
kids, and it's a much smoother path. And it's not to say it won't happen in the homeschooling world. I mean, we certainly, we're in a larger group of friends. There is friend drama, and I
Mhm.
suspect when dating comes into play and feelings come into play and stuff like that, it'll probably get different for some people as well, but yeah, it's a very different culture of kids, generally speaking, being kind to one another, which I'm so thankful for. But yeah, I am pretty much as free range parent as you get. And I will still make sure that my kids are sheltered from asshole opinions. Right. Like it's just
People like you shouldn't even be in college. Yeah, thanks very
exactly. Yeah,
much.
that
Go fuck
that thought
yourself.
process does not fly there, right?
Yeah. Right. So continuing kind of on from that story, my next quote, he's still talking about being in college and how he used that. On the next page on 127, I had pulled a direct quote from the book. It says, "I used time extensions for exams. This may sound like a small thing, but often in school, it's not how well you know something, or it says how well you know something is secondary to how fast you know it."
Uh-huh.
And I mean, that's so true, right? And I was talking before about if your kiddo has most, not all, but most of the time, if they've been diagnosed with a learning disability, there's going to be either a working memory or a processing speed delay there in that mix. And it's gonna come up in this when they're put on the spot. They have to be able to, blurt something out super fast. They're going to struggle with that. And there's not going to be an understanding most of the time. Sometimes you'll have someone great who gets it, but there's not going to be an understanding of the fact that, like, well, if you just slow down and, let them come back to them, or let them know that you're going to ask this, but don't put them on the spot and get back to it, they'll be able to give you that information. But when it's
Mhm.
timed and it's on the spot and it's right now, like, that's not going to give you the best of the vast majority of people. No one, not no one, very few people do their best when they're put on the spot.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. Right. Yeah, I actually, from exactly where you left out on your quote, secondary to how fast you know it, I liked the fact that he continued. He said, there is no justification for this. We should not be educating a generation of Jeopardy contestants, right?
Mhm.
Like, it goes back to the value. Like, what is the value of being able to say, like, I can recall random facts on a moment's notice? Like, great, super happy for you, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's not a huge, maybe there's a handful of careers where that's super essential, and that's great. If you're really good at it, then you'll probably naturally incline towards those things. If you're
Mhm.
not good at that, you probably won't naturally incline towards those things, and that's okay too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So this chapter, it wraps up with him deciding that he's going to drop soccer so that he can take a summer job opportunity. And he consulted a soccer coach who was a mentor, and they're kind of like, look, you are not soccer, you are more than soccer. And if you have to let soccer go to explore that, go for it. And so he's exploring that, he's doing that, and then he decides to transfer schools. And at this point, he introduces us to Brown and what led him there. And we go on from there, right? But this was actually my first introduction. I didn't know much about Brown. Were you familiar with Brown before this?
No, this was
Yeah.
not. I mean, I knew it was an Ivy League school, and I would have lumped it in with all the other Ivies, right? And in
Hmm.
reality, we learned from the book, and then also from our interview that we've conducted with Jonathan, which will air when we finish our discussion of the book, how completely different Brown is from not just the other Ivy League schools, but most four-year institutions. It was completely amazing to hear about his experience there.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so that brings us to section 6. What was the title of section 6? Do you remember?
I'll have it handy. Hold on. Okay.
Normal
Normal
people
people
suck.
suck. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
That's
Right there in the title. So I have the first quote in this section right off the bat on page 135 and 136. I'm going to read the quote and paraphrase a little here and there, but this really struck me. It says, "What is a disability? Who are the disabled? And am I one of them? It's a category, of course, that is just one of many substrata of the normal and not normal hierarchy. It's a category that can become a person's identity and has the power to shape one's life. Are these categories real? Of course not. And also, of course, they are. Both can be true. The categories of abnormality, like disability, are not real like air, but real like taxes or money." And it goes on to say the question that matters most is, can someone use these fictional realities based in pathology and stigma to make a better self? I think yes, I did. And that really struck for me because on a personal note, right? I've kind of mentioned this before and shared, but I am disabled, and it's complicated. It's complicated to get to the point where you can acknowledge it and then go beyond acknowledging it, but embracing it. And I feel like you can't truly start advocating until you embrace it. It's a label, and it's a weird label to be embracing, and the language around that is complicated, and there are a lot of complicated personal feelings. But again, I feel like he said, can you embrace all that comes with that in a way to make a better self? And I think you can, but I think it takes a lot of hard work,
Mhm.
and it's not a smooth, easy pace. I know even for me personally, went to a happy hour earlier this week, and someone asked me what I did for work. And I was like, well, I do a lot of little things here and there, but technically I'm disabled and I can't work a full-time job. And she was like, oh, no, you're not. That thing of like, I suppose in some ways it's like, it's nice that like, oh, I guess I don't I don't look disabled, I don't look disabled enough. But then that brings in this whole other, like, you're advocating for people. Like, disability doesn't have to be written on your forehead. There are lots of
Right.
ways to be disabled that is not obvious to everyone, and that constantly having to advocate for yourself. Like, no, actually, like, I worked with my medical providers, and like, we came to this decision together. Like, I didn't randomly decide to label myself with this, or like,
It's my persona that I slipped on for happy hour this week.
yeah, I thought it would be fun to tell everyone that I'm disabled, but yet I still have a life. Like, it's complicated and it's hard. And even when you embrace it, you still have these moments where you're like,
Yeah.
ah,
Yeah. I mean, so I can't remember if it was in this episode or in our previous episode, but I mentioned that over the weekend, I spoke at a homeschool conference about the power of better understanding neurodivergence as a society as a whole. And literally, my final slide of the presentation has two facts on it. It's like, if you take nothing away from this, take this. Number one, be kind, right? Like, you
mhm,
don't need to know someone's entire life history to know that kindness is always the best route, right? You
mhm,
don't need the details of how you became disabled, how it affects you on a daily life. Just be kind, right? And then the second one is, and this, again, it's a presentation on neurodivergence, but you could apply that to someone's gender identity, their medical, their disability status, whatever, right? And it is, always trust that that person understands their whatever better than you do. They understand their neurodivergence, their disability, their gender identity, whatever it is. They know it. So when they tell you what it is, just believe them and be
just
kind.
trust them and be kind. Yeah. Don't offer an essential oil or tell them to work harder, or like, just trust that they're working with people and they know what they're, like, they know, and you can just accept and let it go, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So it does. It makes it tough. But yeah, and so it's like, in the world that we live in, you have to really have the diagnosis. You have to have the label in order to get anywhere. And I was reading a post just this morning. It happens all the time. Is it going to help or hurt my kid to get a diagnosis? And the mom's thing was, if he wants to grow up to be a pilot and he gets diagnosed with ADHD, he can't be a pilot. Okay. That's one of about 70 trillion career options. Like, and really, do you want somebody who potentially needs, support for their ADHD flying your plane? Like, you know what I mean? Like, doesn't that seem like me? There is a thing. So, and I Googled it and I kind of went down a deep dive. And so it says, typically speaking, from what I read online, and of course, it seemed like a valid website, but you never know. People who take stimulant meds are excluded from being pilots, which is interesting to me because I'd rather have a pilot who's got diagnosed ADHD and is on stimulant meds than an undiagnosed pilot who has ADHD. Like my kid, there's a whole thing. Were you a Ted Lasso fan, Amanda? Did you ever watch that show?
I watched some of it. Yeah.
Love that show. So there's a whole thing about like being a goldfish because goldfish have the shortest memories. So my ADHD kiddo jokes that he is, all three of my kids have ADHD, but I have one kid who's like super neurospicy. He jokes that he is a goldfish with amnesia. So not only does he have the shortest memory of any living creature, but then also he has amnesia on top of it. Like he has zero working memory whatsoever for things that matter to him, don't matter to him, like zero working memory. His ADHD pills are, I mean, it's night and freaking day, And I'm like, so do I want a goldfish with amnesia flying the plane because they were afraid of getting a label? Like that's a societal thing, right? But at the same time, it's not a reason to not diagnose your child. And Jonathan Mooney talks in the book about like people who don't get diagnoses will diagnose themselves. I think it's in this section, right? Stupid, crazy, and lazy. Like they'll come up with all sorts of labels for themselves because they feel so different. Society will come up with labels for them based upon the way they interact in society and their productivity in society. And mind you, their productivity in society might not be amazing because they're operating with no support structure whatsoever because they don't have a diagnosis. And so, yeah, diagnose the kid, right? The answer is pretty much always diagnose. I can't really think of a scenario where the answer would not be diagnose the kid, but I don't like to speak in absolutes. So, but yeah, diagnose the kid.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
That was actually almost your next point was on page 146. You have the power of having a diagnosis. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so I did make a quick note on 143 that Brown is basically an unschooling college, which is what I learned from the reading here, right? And when we'll talk more about that in our interview with Jonathan Mooney, but you can basically build your own curriculum and pathway at Brown. And I was like, oh my gosh, that is super amazing. Because as my unschoolers have entered the world of college, part of the issue has been they've had free access to information for a really long time, and they've been able to pursue really deep interests and passions. And now it's like, okay, well, now we're going to put you in the school and you have to take like 16 credits of, foundation layer junk that you have no interest in to get to something that's meaty that you're interested in. And in some cases, the college's definition of meaty isn't meaty enough because they've had free access to information all this time. They're beyond that point in some cases. And so I was super interested in hearing about what he had to say about Brown, and it was fascinating. So be sure to tune in for that. But yeah, you're right. On page 146, I made a note here about the power of having diagnosis, right? It says in the book, I actually found the science made me feel better. I struggled with reading and writing, not because I was stupid, but because of left hemisphere deficits. I always lost my car keys, not because I was lazy or unintentionally disorganized, but due to frontal lobe impairments, right? Like it explains who you are and why you move through the world in a certain way. He goes on to say, so many of what we call neurodiversities were moralized before they were pathologized. So the kid who couldn't read was dumb. The one who couldn't sit still was bad. The one who couldn't make eye contact was willfully defiant. And so without diagnosing your kids, there's still those things. And even if they haven't verbally explained it to you, they end up feeling that way about themselves, whether just through watching the world around them and feeling out of place in it, or through little tiny microaggressions, little comments that are being made towards them about their participation in the world. These are happening. They need that diagnosis to better understand who they are. And I kind of feel like for me, it brought up a thing. For whatever reason, I read this a couple of weeks ago now, but I made a note in the book, like, I feel like there's a thing that happens every year at Halloween. I don't know if you see these in some of the groups that you're in, but we have like a mom group in town and stuff like that, or just like general township groups. And there's always these things at Halloween time about reminding people, like the kid who doesn't say Halloween might have some sort of issue with speaking to strangers, or they might be completely nonverbal or partially whatever, right? the kid who doesn't wear costumes, like I have a child, my oldest has never really worn a costume. So he does costumes in his way. Like once he went as Steve Jobs and he wore a black t-shirt, right? Like that was his costume. And then the next year he went as Mark Zuckerberg and he wore a gray t-shirt, right? One year he went as Percy Jackson and he wore his Camp Half-Blood t-shirt, right? Like these are his costumes. They are costumes to him, right? They fit his requirement. He cannot wear a costume otherwise, right? He cannot have anything on his body that's super foreign or anything or very uncomfortable like that. And so there's this debate that goes on every year in the comments in these posts about Halloween, like just be nice. If somebody came to your door and knocks on and rings the doorbell and holds up a pumpkin, just say happy Halloween and give them candy. Like, we don't need to force somebody to say happy Halloween. We don't need to question them why they're not wearing a costume. They're there. They're out of their house. They're putting in the effort. They're hanging out with friends. They're doing the thing. They're participating in a way that works for them and the way they move through the world. And then invariably in the comments, you always get these things like, well, if a kid can't put in the effort to put on a costume, I'm not giving them a candy. Like, really?
Yeah, like that 5-cent piece of candy, like just drop it in their bucket, like
Halloween is like, so, I mean, my youngest, my 12-year-old is the only one that trick-or-treats still. At least he did last year. We'll see what this year brings. He, again, doesn't really do like huge costumes. He will put on a costume. He wore the big dinosaur inflatable like 2 years ago. You know, that like famous.
Yeah.
It was Texas. So he almost turned into a puddle. He's very hot in there. I wouldn't recommend it if you live like south of the Mason-Dixon line, but it's toasty. But he will trick or treat. But then on top of it, he's autistic. He's ADHD. He has severe food allergies. He's allergic to eggs, dairy, and soy. So he can't even eat most of what he trick or treats for. I have to swap it out for things that he can eat. He's a big fan of the Lent oat milk chocolate, which I think does actually have a touch of soy in it, but it's like the closest thing we could find. And he'll get like a little bit of upset tummy, but he knows it's there and not like sneaking soy, I mean, he knows it's there. That's like his acceptable substitution on Halloween. But yeah, I'm like, why can't we just be nice? Like, why do we have to understand everyone's life history in order to grant them grace? It seems like a bit much.
Yeah. No, I mean, we see that too. And we occasionally trick or treat with someone who's nonverbal, and that thing, like it shouldn't have to be a thing, and it just shouldn't be a thing. I will say Halloween costumes in our family are huge. We do a family costume each year. It's a big deal. It's a big, big deal.
You'll have to share pictures this year. You'll have to put them on our stories or something for people to see. Yeah. No, I dressed up, I think, once, and it was like a very last minute decision to try to dress up and do something. I had fun with the kids, but I mean, I always have fun whether I'm dressed up or not. But yeah, usually I just head out. And now my older two have kind of dropped out of the mix, and they're like, it's not worth it for the Reese's Pieces. We'll just go to the store and buy some. And I'm like, okay, party poopers, but sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I hope we don't ever hit that point. I hope we're the family that's still like trick or treating and dressing up for parties forever.
I like it. What you got next?
All right. So I had on page 148, there was another quote that really jumped out at me. It said, if the world is a continuum in all its forms, maybe we are all on a continuum of ability and disability of some sorts and just don't know it yet. I think that's so true, right? I mean, we like to have so much judgment in how we interact with people and the world. And there's just so much judgment about young people who are disabled or young people who have other things going on. And then you see someone young will have cancer, and to me, it's that thing of like, we look at that and we go, oh, like their partner stepped up and marriage is about for good and for better and worse, and this is a moment of worse. And like, why don't we see all of life that way? Like it's ebbing and it's flowing and it's a continuum. And yes, maybe one person is more sick now, but you know what? Someday it could be you and it could be even worse or even more. And they're going to have to deal with that and figure their way out through that. And you would hope that they would show kindness and grace in that situation for you. Think why, again, kind of like what you were saying, that just be nice, be nice and have grace and understand that, yeah, you're really lucky that it doesn't impact you right now for whatever reason. It's not your personal story, and maybe you're slightly inconvenienced because someone in your circle has something going on. But one of these days, it is going to be you.
Mhm.
Like at some point, something is going to happen and it is going to be you. And you're going to hope that they treat you better than you were treating them when you were like, oh, what an inconvenience.
Mhm. Yeah, it's huge. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I brought it up on the podcast yet, but I was talking to somebody about it this weekend. I met a woman who we added her book to our to be read list. Her name was Amy Bodkin, and she counsels homeschool families as well, mostly people who have special needs kids or are going through like they're homeschooling through cancer or something like that, right? And offers support and care for that. And so I was talking to her, and then there was a woman at her booth whose child is, I believe, still in treatment. And my husband's a cancer survivor. And we were talking about the fact, like, you can't even fathom. I mean, you think you can, and not you. I don't mean you. Like the world at large, right? Unless
Yeah.
you've lived it, you truly can't fathom the amount of stress and pressure and like the fear of just like a single germ, like and that goes on for years for people
Mhm.
to live under that sort of to live in that sort of pressure cooker for so long, and the effect that it has. And like I have a friend who used to call me. She didn't live in the same town as me. She lived in the next town over, but our kids went to the same preschool. And she would just call me and be like, I'm going to the supermarket. Do you need anything? Like all the time. And it was like just something like that small. Like my kids got the stomach flu one time and they gave it to me. So all the four of us had the stomach flu. My husband had to leave the house immediately because he had like a half a white blood cell basically. And so I'm there like, so sick. Like it hurt to lay down on a mattress. I was in so much pain, like just that level of sick. And like every day she would check, like, and when we got to the point where we could like maybe keep down like some electrolytes, she would bring, when we got to the point that maybe we could keep down crackers, she brought those. She would just drop them on the porch. She didn't want the plague, but it was like just having somebody like go that, like, that is, the world needs more of that. Like, I will never forget that for as long as I live, because there's people that say like, oh, that stinks or whatever. But like, she was there, right? She was, an amazing person to be in my corner at that time, which was so much recognized and appreciated.
Yeah, no, for real. The people who actually walk the walk instead of just talk the talk.
Exactly. Huge, right? My next note that I loved, are you familiar with those people that make videos, they're content creators, the Holderness family? Do you know
A
them? I
little.
think a
Yeah.
little bit. Like I don't think I follow them, which is probably terrible to say. I'm sorry if somebody ever forwards this stuff. I'm sorry, but like I do catch the stuff.
Yeah.
And he made a video about renaming ADHD and what a terrible name ADHD is. And I loved the fact that it came up in this book, right? ADHD, there's no deficit of attention with ADHD. It's the way that attention is funneled through
Mhm.
ADHD, right? Like they can hyper focus like nobody's business. I mean, if you need something really sorted out, like some big problem, and it's like, we need you to get to the bottom of this, they will get to the bottom of that and then also solve like 4 ancillary problems at the same time because they're down the same rabbit hole, right? So yeah, it's like, and I feel like it's one of those things where it's like another name of like another situation of like lousy naming, and it just gets stuck, right? So like it reminds me of like global warming, right? Like, so Al Gore, I think, might have been like one of the early people that coined global warming, and now we use the term climate change. Well, every freaking time there's a big snowstorm, like on Fox News, they're like, so much for global
Global
warming.
warming.
It's snowing out. And I'm like, oh, for fuck's sake, right? Like, yeah. So I feel like sometimes we get stuck with these like poor names for things that really don't describe the thing. Kind of like homeschooling, right? We don't
Mhm.
school at home, we school in the world, right? Our kids
Yeah.
are out and about and all that kind of stuff. And so it's like sometimes the name like kind of sets us up for more hurdles that even need to be there. And I feel like
Mhm.
ADHD is one of those things. So I just kind of liked that existed there.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, I had kind of mentioned that there are just a bunch of stories. There are a ton of stories sprinkled throughout these chapters and this entire book. And so for me, my next after that was he kind of launches into a story about a mentorship program that they created while they were students at Brown. And it's another great example of his storytelling style and how funny it is and how, I mean, it really pulls you along and you're like, you're waiting for what's going to happen. And at one point he thinks it's going to be bad. So he throws his friend under the bus and then he's like, oh, never mind. They're my great friend because it's not bad. But so just kind of one of those things. If you're just skimming this book and you're not paying extra attention to everything, which is totally fine. I read that way sometimes too. I really encourage you to slow down and go back to page 156 to 157 and read the story. Take a few extra minutes to read the story about Brent and Jimmy. It's a great story. It's heartwarming, and it's a poignant example of what we're trying to get across here in everything we're talking about.
Yeah. I highlighted on the bottom of 157, which is where that is. For the first time in Jimmy's life, he had been told that he wasn't broken. He wasn't the problem. And that helped him get out of bed and face a world that wasn't made for him. And I felt like how sad was, how difficult was this? I mean, you could read that one of two ways. You can read that and be like, that's wonderful for him. But then when you read it and you think about the number of days that he faced the world feeling like he wasn't even a part of it, it's so utterly and completely heartbreaking. It's devastating.
That's it. I cried. I had tears in my eyes with that because I felt both of those things, right? Like that amazing, like he finally had someone in his corner who wasn't saying you shouldn't even be in college, you're so stupid, like, and the fact that he had enough of that shit experience to
beforehand,
for one single positive experience to be enough to like completely change his outlook on life and his willingness to go on. Like, I mean, I think you have a heart of stone if that doesn't make you at least a little verklempt, right?
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And then, sorry, my alarm is going off on my phone there. There's always something to be done, right? If the alarms don't ring, it doesn't happen in my house. Like it has to go.
Yeah, we live by alarms and Alexa reminders. We use a lot of Alexa prompts. I don't have to nag anymore because Alexa nags for me. It's amazing.
It's great. She's amazing. I love that. So we both have the same closing note for the week on page 160, which is the very last page of this section. But I highlighted a section here that says, I want you to know that I did not and do not have a disability, as it is common to say, but experienced disability in environments that could not accommodate and embrace my differences. What disabled me was the way that my differences were treated in an environment that was hostile to some bodies and brains and not to others. Ability, disability, and abnormality are not facts in the world, but social constructs we create as a society. And I loved that.
Yeah. So I haven't, it was a little bit more complicated for me, my reaction to that. And so my note says specifically that I'm not sure I like this distinction of have a disability versus experienced disability in environments that could not accommodate and embrace my differences. And I know that statement and that entire whole paragraph, it goes on to explain it more in depth. It comes from a good place, right? And I know that and I understand that, which is why I feel like it's just a little complicated. And I shared that a little earlier. I was talking about, I am disabled and I don't look it and it's not obvious on the surface. And I'm constantly having to fight back on people who are like, well, no, you're fine. You're fine. You can work. And I'll never forget, the first time I was sitting with my doctor and she looked at me and said, you do realize that you're never going to be able to have a full-time job and work a full-time job again, unless something very, very drastic changes. You are incapable of working a full-time job. And I mean, it felt like the floor fell out from underneath me, like that's in our society and the social construct that we have, like having someone tell you that, I was in my 30s and I had been dealing with these things for a long time, but like actually having that just put there, and having to address that and work through what that means for the rest of your life, right? I mean, you're not even halfway through your life in your 30s and, it's complicated, right? And so for me, it's a very long discussion and we don't have time to spend those hours talking through that and what that means and what that looks like. But I just want to make a note, if you're following along or if you're reading along with us and you read that and it made you feel a little uncomfortable because you weren't sure, I just want you to know you're not alone, right? If it doesn't sit well with you and you have a lot of thoughts and a lot of feelings on that, you aren't alone in those thoughts and feelings, and that's okay, right? There's for people who are personally impacted by this, you are allowed to have a lot of thoughts and feelings and to not 100% align with some of these things that are being said.
Yeah, I can completely understand that. I think the reason that I liked it was because of the debate that goes on right now with first person language when it comes to like a person with autism, a person who has autism, a person who is autistic, right? Like
Mhm.
that thing. And we were talking about it. Like I met somebody over the weekend and I was like, you know, you're not a woman with Black. You're a Black woman. That is your identity. That
Mhm.
is a part of who you are, right? It's not something you like add on for the day or like toss in your purse and carry along with you. And I think with some of the neurodivergence diagnoses, it kind of can have that same, right? Like an autistic person experiences the world always as an autistic, but like that is a piece of their identity. And being disabled, of course, is a piece of your identity too. I think that's why I liked it so much. That was because of that, just the grammatical piece of it. Really, like like it's not an accessory, right? It's a piece of 100% who you are, and it affects the way you exist in the whole world. And so
Yeah.
which I get is part of what you're saying, also, but it affects us both differently, probably. So that's why I loved it, and it made you. Mhm.
And the thing is again, it's that thing. It's complicated, right? Just a couple weeks ago, I was at an event and I was talking with another homeschool mom, and something was said, and I said, "Well, my kiddo does have a learning disability, which makes that a little different for us." And she was like, "No, he doesn't have a learning disability. He has a learning difference." And I was like, you know, no, you don't get to tell me whether or not we're going to embrace and say, look, this is a learning disability. This is the language around it. And these are the things we can do. And this is how we're going to address it. Like, you don't get to come into my house and downplay it and be like, no, no, it's like,
Did she try to tell you you were differently abled afterward?
I mean, basically, yeah, there was a whole lot of other stuff wrong in that conversation. But so it's that thing, like it is about the language. And I understand that in this context, it's a positive thing. I feel in the bigger context, in the bigger conversation, it can get a little bit more complicated and a little bit more difficult. And how you embrace that and the language is complicated. And you're right, it's changing. And there are people who are like, this is first person language. No, that's not first person language. This is, and
Right.
this is how I want. Well, that's not how you're supposed to want to be referred to. Like,
Right.
well, you don't get to tell me how I want to refer to myself and how I want to live this experience, right? Like,
Exactly.
it's,
Because even I talked about it over the weekend at the presentation that I gave, like even the term Asperger's, right? So Asperger's
Mhm.
has been removed from the medical catalog because he was a giant friggin' Nazi. And so we don't use that term anymore. But there's plenty of people who grew up as Aspies, right? That's their identity. And they're like, you can't just tell me from one day to the next that, which also has like a nice hint of autism to it, right? Like you can't just tell me from one day to the next that my identity has changed. You don't get to do that. It's my identity, right? And so like,
Mhm.
yeah, if you don't want to use that term going forward or whatever, but this is my identity and you can't just take it away because you've chosen to, right? And so that
Mhm.
was one of the things that we talked about. Like if you're unsure how to refer to someone or what their preference is about first person language, not first person, whatever, ask them, right?
Yeah.
It goes back to that thing, like be kind and trust that whatever that person tells you about their experience in the world is the correct one for them, right? Like that is the correct one for that person. And you can ask them and then you can trust and believe their answer. It
Yeah.
makes it it does simplify it to an extent
Mhm.
on an individual basis when you can just take that very simple advice and just be like, oh, your kid has a learning disability. Okay, thanks. Thanks for sharing. Right? I don't need to fix it.
Mhm.
I don't need to offer you advice. I don't need to correct you. I don't need to do any of those things. It's just like, noted. Thanks for sharing a piece of your, day to day with me.
Yeah, that thing. Eh, thank you for like being that vulnerable, and because it's that you never know where someone is on their journey with being able to share where, because normal, not normal, abnormal, weird, whatever it is, it's a vulnerability,
Mhm.
right? And to be able to put that out there, you don't know if it's the first time they're testing out sharing this vulnerability, or if they're an advocate and they're out there telling people all of the time, even if they are an advocate, right? I try to be an advocate with all of the challenges and hurdles that I've had in my life and different things. it doesn't change the fact that there are some days or some
Yes.
weeks that it hits a little deeper. I'm a little bit more tender, and those jabs, they hurt more than
Yeah.
other weeks where I'm
Or you're
feeling
just
really
tired
strong.
sometimes.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And it hits deeper. It hurts more. And you just be kind. It
Yeah.
doesn't cost you anything, actually.
Nope. Yeah. Well, we have one more episode on this book. We'll be finishing up our book next week. And then the following week is our author interview, which is super exciting. Reminder that you can visit the link in our post or in our Instagram bio to enter to win a copy of Normal Sucks. It's a great book. Jonathan Mooney's written 2 other books as well, The Short Bus and Learning Outside the Lines, both amazing. But that'll wrap us up for today. And we will catch you all next week. In the meantime, happy homeschooling.
Yeah. Have a great one.